My name is Harriet Lane. I'm 67 years old. I was a librarian for most of my life, then a caregiver, and then nothing. After my husband died, I became what a lot of women my age become: invisible. I live alone now in a quiet coastal town in Maine. A gray shingled house, windy windows, and a kettle that always knows when it's time to sing. That morning, it was singing, softly. The rain outside had just begun a quiet drizzle that softened the air. I was steeping Darjeeling loose leaf, not the bags. My husband Jonathan used to call it your ritual, like it was a church I never stopped going to. And then she arrived. Amelia, my son's new bride. The wedding was exactly 6 days ago. I hadn't seen her since. No thank you note. No follow-up call. Not even a photo from their honeymoon. She just appeared standing at the threshold of my kitchen in a beige trench coat and heels far too expensive for rain. "Hi, Harriet," she said. Not Mom, not even Mrs. Lane. Just Harriet. I didn't ask how she found her way in. The door had been unlocked. I poured her tea, even though she didn't ask. And she didn't touch it. Instead, she reached into her oversized leather bag and pulled out a folder. Yellow, manila, sealed. She slid it across the table like a waitress delivering a check. No smile, no explanation. Just this is for the trust we're building. For when Evan and I have children. It's just a precaution, of course. I didn't reach for it. Not yet. She placed both hands on the table, leaned in, and said something I'll never forget. Not because it was cruel, but because it was rehearsed. "I don't need to know how much you have, Harriet. But it's important to us that Evan takes the lead going forward. He'll be the head of our family now. I'm sure you understand." She said it like it was obvious, like I'd just been waiting for my turn to expire. I looked at the folder again. I already knew what it was. I didn't have to open it. But I did. Inside was a legal document requesting a transfer of assets into something called the Croft Family Stability Trust. My full name was already printed at the top, Harriet M. Lane, followed by a list of line items I was expected to initial and affirm. I closed the folder slowly. Amelia was smiling now. The kind of smile you'd use on a retail clerk or a flight attendant. Polite, practiced, dismissive. You know, she added with everything going on, it's just easier to handle this now. We don't want any confusion later. And Evan, well, he has a lot on his plate. A lot on his plate. That's what they say when they want you to feel guilty for making them think. She tapped the table once with her manicured fingernail. "We'll need it signed before next Thursday." And then just like that, she stood, adjusted her coat, and left. She didn't finish her tea. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't know. She didn't know that I had already inherited over $1 billion from my late husband. Quietly. Legally. Entirely outside of Evan's awareness. She didn't know that I'd kept it hidden for nearly 12 years, not out of secrecy, but protection. And she certainly didn't know that by handing me that folder before ever calling me Mom, she'd triggered something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Not rage, not grief, clarity. Thank God I never said a word about the money. Because now I could see exactly what kind of family Evan had married into, and I wasn't going to fight them. I was going to watch, quietly, because people like Amelia always write their own ending. They just expect someone like me to sign off on it. After Amelia left that morning, I didn't move for a long time. The kettle had long since grown cold. The tea sat untouched. My fingers traced the rim of the porcelain cup, the same one Jonathan brought me back from Kyoto in '89. I'd always liked how fragile it looked, paper thin, almost translucent. But it had outlasted 3 kitchens, and a marriage that never broke, only ended. Jonathan was not a loud man. He never demanded space. He simply occupied it like air. You didn't notice until it was gone. When we met, he was a junior analyst for a firm no one remembers now. I was working part-time at the library and balancing the firm's books on weekends. We bonded over numbers, not in the cold, greedy way, but in how quietly numbers tell the truth. They don't scream. They just sit there, balanced, or not. By the time Evan was born, Jonathan had already begun building something beyond what I could grasp. Not a company, not a brand, but a latticework of entities, trusts, offshore holdings, a shadow architecture of wealth, one that didn't carry his name. On purpose, he never once bragged, never once said, "If anything happens to me, you'll be set." That wasn't his way. He said, "If they can't see it, they can't steal it." And when I looked at him confused, he'd add, "They won't see you either, Harriet. And that's how you'll stay safe." I became his mirror, his record keeper, his quiet accountant. At night, after Evan was asleep, we'd sit at the dining table and go over line items like other couples watch movies. I knew what each shell company held. I helped him construct the firewall. What I didn't know, what I only learned after his death, was that he'd tied every last dollar to a singular structure that bore my name. Quietly filed in the registry of a holding company in the Cayman Islands, funneled through 6 channels entirely legal, yet invisible. He never told me because he didn't need to. He trusted me more than any lawyer. And so after the funeral, after the silence and casseroles and awkward sympathy, I opened a sealed envelope left in our safety box. Inside was one sentence typed on yellow paper: "No will, just trust. And you." I remember sitting on the floor, back against the radiator as the gravity of it hit me. $1 billion. Not in gold, not in stocks I'd need to sell, but quietly layered across 1,000 pages I already knew by heart. Because we built it together. There was no pomp, no inheritance ceremony, just a password, a code phrase, and the kind of silence that only 2 people who really knew each other could share even across death. And I told no one. Not the banker who kept calling to offer legacy planning. Not the estate attorney who blinked too much and smiled too hard. And certainly not Evan. Not because I didn't trust my son. I raised that boy. I nursed him through asthma and self-doubt. I watched him take his first steps on a kitchen floor that Jonathan tiled with his own hands. No, I didn't tell Evan, because I knew he wouldn't be the one to come for it. But someone else might. Someone who would smile before calling me Harriet. Someone who would hand me a contract before asking how I take my tea. Someone like Amelia. I didn't need to fight her. I just needed to remember what Jonathan always said. You don't have to be louder than them. Just be further ahead. And so I stayed quiet. Because quiet was where I kept the storm. The first real visit came a week after the wedding. Evan texted me that morning something simple. "Hey Mom, can we stop by for a bit? Amelia wants to see the house." The house. Not you. I noticed, but I didn't say anything. I just put out clean napkins, wiped down the picture frames, and let the kettle warm itself. When they arrived, Evan was the first through the door. Same as when he was little, bursting in like every return was a surprise party. He kissed my cheek, smiled with both teeth and eyes, and smelled faintly of rosemary and lavender soap. Then came Amelia. She stepped in slowly, like someone touring a property they weren't sure was worth the asking price. Her gaze didn't stop at me. It wandered. Across the mantel, the bookshelf, the floorboards. She took in the room like a home inspector. "Wow," she said, running one hand lightly over the oak dining table. "This is so preserved." I wasn't sure what that meant. Preserved like a museum or like a body. Evan chuckled. "Mom keeps everything exactly where Dad left it." "It's kind of sacred, huh, Mom?" Amelia nodded, but she didn't laugh. She stepped over to the window and tugged slightly at the curtain, checking the view. Then the questions began. "How long have you lived here? Do you own the place outright? Did Jonathan ever talk about remodeling?" None of them sounded like small talk. "Not really." I answered plainly. 32 years. "Yes. We paid off the mortgage in '03. "No. We never remodeled. Jonathan built this house himself." By hand, she asked, eyebrows lifted. Every beam. I tapped the wall with my knuckles. He was a quiet man, but his hands always told the truth. Evan was rummaging through the fridge by then. He pulled out the peach preserves and said Amelia loves anything sweet. She's obsessed with lemon curd. "Don't out me," she said with a laugh, finally flashing something that resembled warmth. But it wasn't aimed at me, only at him. Over tea, she relaxed slightly. She asked about my garden, complimented the china, and said the hardwood floors gave the home such character. But she never once looked at our wedding photo hanging above the fireplace, or the small clay turtle Evan made for me in 3rd grade, still sitting on the bookshelf. Instead, her eyes kept drifting to the framed deeds on the wall, the certificate from the state library board, the antique key Jonathan had mounted from his first office. She noticed things that mattered to Jonathan, and by extension, maybe to me, but not in a sentimental way, in a cataloging way. And then, just as I was pouring her second cup of tea, she said it. "If I were you," she began lightly stirring the lemon slice with the edge of her spoon, "I wouldn't leave everything without some kind of structure. You know, conditions. The world's not safe anymore." She said it casually, like talking about the weather, but her eyes held something sharper. I just nodded, smiled, poured more tea. Evan reached over and squeezed her hand, laughing. "She's a planner. You'll love that about her mom. She makes me put sunscreen in the glove compartment. No joke." He said it with such innocence, such unfiltered pride, that it made something twist inside me. He thought he was being taken care of, that someone was finally looking out for him the way I always had. I wanted so badly to believe it. But Amelia never asked to see Evan's childhood room. She never asked what his favorite bedtime story was. She didn't ask how he coped after Jonathan died. She asked about the land deed, the property lines, the energy bills. Evan was too close to see the difference. But I could. Some people come into your life with open palms. Others come with measuring tapes. Jonathan used to say, "There are people who build walls to protect what they love, and others who knock just to see what's worth taking." I didn't know which one Amelia was yet, but she hadn't looked me in the eyes since she walked in. I called George the next morning. Not a text, not an email, a voice. I wanted him to hear mine steady resolved, but not cold. He answered on the second ring. "Harriet," he said like I was the last person he expected to hear from. "Is everything all right? Do you still have access to Jonathan's template for the estate summary?" I asked. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough. "I do," he said slowly. "Why?" "Because we're going to write a new one," I told him. "And it needs to look like it's the only one I've got." George exhaled, and I could hear his chair creak in that old office of his in Portland. "All right," he said. "How much are we saying you're worth $250,000? I replied. "No more than that." Just enough to keep it plausible. Leftover life insurance, a couple of index funds, maybe an old savings account. Nothing liquid, he asked. Nothing tempting, I said. George didn't argue. He'd known Jonathan better than anyone outside our family. He was the one who'd helped us build the labyrinth in the first place. Now I was asking him to build a false door within it. We'll need fake transaction histories, he said. Something that'll hold up if someone gets curious. Just enough for someone to take the bait, I told him. But not enough to ruin their appetite. Another pause. Then George said something I didn't expect, but somehow knew was coming. Harriet, he said gently, if your son isn't involved in this, you're going to lose him. And if he is, you already have. The line went quiet. I stood in the kitchen, staring out the window at the pine trees bending slightly in the wind. The leaves looked like they were whispering to each other, warning each other. I need to know, I whispered. I can live with anything but doubt. George didn't try to talk me out of it. He simply said, "Come in Tuesday. I'll have everything ready." 3 days later, I was sitting across from him at his old mahogany desk, same as I had when Jonathan and I first met with him back in 1987. Back then, I was young and unsure. Now I was older, but not uncertain. George laid out the papers. They looked real because they were in every way that mattered to a curious outsider. Clean account summaries, modest returns, no signs of extravagance, no whispers of hidden millions. We even added a small IRA that looked untouched since 2004. No one questions something, this boring George said. It's like beige wallpaper. That's exactly what I want, I said. He slid the manila envelope across the table. What happens next? I leave it where it can be found, I said. Accidentally. You sure? I nodded. If she's digging, she'll find it. And if he's helping her dig, then I need to know. George folded his hands, leaned forward, and looked at me like he had something else to say. What I asked. I just wish he said carefully that Jonathan could see this. He'd be proud. You didn't build this fortune, Harriet, but you damn well learned how to protect it. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Later that evening, I brought the file home. I placed it in the second drawer of my writing desk, the one with the loose handle and no lock. The drawer I knew Evan remembered from childhood, because it used to hold his school certificates and old report cards. It was the kind of drawer you don't think twice about opening. I sat there for a while just staring at it. I wasn't angry, not exactly. I was preparing for something I couldn't name yet. But it was coming. And when it did, I would be ready. Evan invited me to lunch 2 days later. His message was cheerful, casual. Let's catch up, Mom. I miss you. He added a smiley face. The kind a grown man uses when he wants to sound like a boy again. We met at the old seafood diner near the harbor, the one with the blue booths and checkered curtains. The waitress still knew my order. Haddock grilled no tartar. Evan arrived 5 minutes late, carrying the same energy he always had. Warm, slightly scattered, a little too loud for the room. He kissed my cheek and said, "You look beautiful, Mom." I smiled. It was the same line he'd used since high school when he wanted money for concert tickets. He meant it, but only half. We talked about the weather. His new job consulting something vaguely impressive but undefined. He mentioned Amelia twice. Once about her loving Italian food. Once about how she'd reorganized their spice rack alphabetically. I didn't even know we had cardamom. He laughed. I laughed too. The way you do when you're scanning a room while pretending you're not. We ordered. Then he leaned in, and I saw it, the slight shift in posture, the lowering of the voice, the beginning of the real reason. "Mom," He said gently, "Can I ask you something?" Kind of awkward. I folded my napkin slowly. "Of course. It's just—" He tapped the table twice, glanced out the window, then back at me. "You know, with everything going on and with you getting older, Amelia and I were thinking, maybe it's time to sort some things out. Just in case." Just in case. There it was. The phrase people use when they want to talk about death without sounding morbid. He continued, still trying to sound neutral. Like where the accounts are, what the will says, stuff like that. I looked down at my plate. The fish was cooling untouched. I mean, we don't want to make things complicated for anyone. If anything ever happened, it'd just be good to know where everything is. For your peace of mind, too. My peace of mind. I picked up my fork, set it down again. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't even being pushy, but every word felt like it had been handed to him by someone else. Polished. Rehearsed. "Did Amelia ask you to bring this up?" I asked. He hesitated just long enough. "No," he said. "I mean, we talked about it. But it's something I've thought about too." I nodded slowly. "Of course." He reached across the table and touched my hand. "It's not about money, Mom. It's about being prepared." Prepared. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that his concern was for me, that it came from love, not strategy, but something in the timing, the tone, the practiced way he avoided the word inheritance. It didn't sit right. I appreciate that I said softly. He smiled, relieved. He thought the conversation was over. We moved on to safer ground. I asked about his honeymoon. He asked about the hydrangeas. We even laughed about the time Jonathan got locked in the attic trying to fix the fan. But my heart wasn't laughing. It was watching, and that's when it hit me. He wasn't seeing what I saw. He didn't notice how Amelia avoided questions about his childhood, how she changed the subject every time I brought up memories, how her eyes flicked toward titles and deeds, never toward stories. Evan was looking at her with the same eyes he used as a boy, wide, trusting, full of want. He didn't see the sharp edges. And I thought to myself, I don't blame my son for being blind. I only fear that the person leading him has her eyes closed too. When the check came, he insisted on paying. "Let me," he said with a grin. "You've earned a break from taking care of everyone." I smiled again. It was easier than saying what I really felt, that I wasn't done taking care. Not yet. Not when the thing threatening him came wrapped in sweetness and good intentions. As we stood outside, he hugged me tightly. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, sweetheart." And I meant it. But I also meant what I said next, whispered into the breeze as he walked away. "I see more than you think, and I will protect you even from what you can't see yet." It happened just after midnight, 2 days after our lunch. I was folding laundry in the living room, the television humming quietly in the background. One of those nature documentaries where no one ever raises their voice. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Not a call, a notification. Unusual login attempt detected. Citizens Trust Online. At first, I thought it was a glitch. The fake account George and I created was tied to an inactive web login, only accessible through a shadow banking portal. We'd made it look old dormant, boring enough to overlook. But someone had found it. I clicked through the alert and my stomach tightened. Device name, Amelia iPad location, Brooklyn, NY. Exact match to known residence, time 12:03 a.m. They hadn't just sniffed around. They'd tried to open the door. I stared at the screen. My reflection shimmered faintly against the glass, an older woman holding a folded towel blinking against the glow of her own plan working. I didn't panic. I didn't pace. I just stood there breathing slowly, letting the moment fill the room. They'd taken the bait. I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my notebook, wrote the date, time, IP, and device ID. My handwriting looked steadier than I felt. I poured a cup of cold tea, took one sip, and finally made the call. George answered after 2 rings. "They tried to access it," I said. My voice was quiet, not fearful, just certain. "From where?" "Brooklyn. Evans Place. And the device, something called Amelia iPad." George didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then, "You were right." "No," I replied. I wasn't hoping to be right. I was hoping to be wrong. He exhaled. "What do you want to do next?" "Nothing," I said. "Not yet." "You sure they've moved from curiosity to action?" I told him. "Now we wait to see how bold they'll get." I heard him scribble something down. "You know, most people would have confronted them by now." I looked across the kitchen at a photograph of Evan at age 8, missing a front tooth, holding a trophy from his school's spelling bee. The trophy's gone now. He lost it during college. But I kept the photo. I keep a lot of things. "I'm not most people," I said. We hung up. I put the phone face down and sat there for a while, just breathing in the silence. The thing about revenge, quiet revenge, is that it isn't driven by rage. It's built on restraint. You don't win by yelling. You win by knowing, by waiting. I thought about Amelia, sitting cross-legged on their couch, lit by screen light, scrolling through what she thought was a trail to something bigger. I imagined her fingers moving too quickly, the glee of finding a lead. I could picture her calling Evan over, whispering, "I think I found something." And Evan, still wearing the trust I'd stitched into him like a second skin, probably smiled and leaned in. They didn't know they were standing on a trap door. They thought I was predictable. They thought I was soft. They thought I was aging and forgetful and alone. And in many ways, they were right. But they missed the part where I stopped being afraid. I folded the towel on my lap and stood, walked to the window and looked out over the empty street dimly lit by a crooked lamppost. No cars, no voices, just the sound of wind brushing past the eaves. The kind of night you remember when the truth starts to turn. Back at the table, I picked up my phone one more time. No new messages, no calls, just the blinking cursor of silence waiting to be filled. But I didn't write anything. Not yet. It was George who found the video. He called me on a Thursday afternoon, his voice lower than usual, threaded with something like disbelief. "Do you have 10 minutes?" he asked. "Of course. I think you'll want to sit down for this." He emailed me a file. No subject line. No explanation. Just a string of numbers, date, time, and 2 initials, AC. I opened it. The video was grainy shot on a phone with shaky hands. The angle was tilted, probably from someone holding their drink in one hand and their phone in the other. The setting was familiar. The reception hall, hours after the ceremony. People were looser, more candid. The music thumped faintly beneath a layer of laughter and clinking glasses. Amelia was standing in the middle of a circle of bridesmaids, her veil pinned back, a champagne flute in one hand, her heels already off. She was laughing, talking louder than usual. At first, it sounded harmless. A new bride basking in the afterglow of applause and attention. Then, someone asked her, half joking, what she planned to do next. She didn't hesitate. "If everything goes right," she said, raising her glass, "I'll have the keys to the vault in under a year." Laughter. Cheers. A clink of glass. Someone asked, "What vault?" Amelia grinned. You know, the retirement fund. Old money. Real quiet money. Evan's too nice to ask. But once it's all aligned, it'll just be a signature here, a document there. And done. A bridesmaid giggled. So like you married rich. Amelia sipped her champagne, then shrugged. Not yet. Then she added, without blinking, but give me a year. You'll see. The camera swung away mid-laugh, cutting to someone dancing in the corner. The rest of the clip was useless, just noise. But the words had already done what they came to do. I didn't move. I didn't replay it. I didn't even press pause. I just let the silence grow around me like vines. George called again. You saw it. Yes. You okay? I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I'm fine. He waited, maybe expecting rage, maybe tears. But none came. Because the truth is, I wasn't shocked. Not really. It felt like standing in a room you've already evacuated, watching the ceiling finally collapse. You don't scream when you've already packed your bags. She had said it with ease, with confidence. The same way you might say, I'll lose 5 pounds or we'll book that trip next summer. She wasn't unsure. She wasn't ashamed. She just didn't think anyone would hear it. But someone did. And now so had I. I closed the laptop, stood, walked to the sink, poured out the tea I hadn't touched, ran cold water over the cup until my hand started to shake. Then I sat at the table again, staring at the grain of the wood Jonathan had sanded himself. I thought about the vows they'd exchanged, about how Evan had looked at her like she was the sunrise, and how she'd looked at me like I was already sunset. I thought I'd cry, but I didn't. Not even one tear. Because crying is for grief. And this wasn't grief. It was preparation. She'd shown me her cards thinking no one was watching, thinking she'd already won. But now I had something better than proof. I had her own words. I had a truth no one could spin. I had time. And most of all, I had clarity. I whispered it to the quiet room just once. I'm not crying. I'm saving my tears for something that deserves them. I baked lemon cake that morning. The real kind tart dense, topped with glaze so thin it cracked like sugar glass. It was Evan's favorite when he was a boy. Every birthday from age 5 to 12 ended with lemon cake in the same kitchen served on the same chipped blue plate and eaten with the same smile that told me I'd done something right. I baked it for Amelia. Not as a peace offering, as context. I called her mid-morning and said I had a few things to discuss. Small things. Nothing urgent. She agreed without hesitation. I could tell she thought it was a surrender. She arrived dressed like she always did, too crisp for casual, too polished for a family visit. Her makeup was clean and sharp, her nails a subtle nude. She didn't kiss my cheek, didn't ask how I'd been. Just stepped into the kitchen, saw the cake, and smiled politely. I wasn't expecting dessert. No one ever does, I said. But we serve it anyway. We sat. I poured tea. She didn't touch hers. I took a bite of cake first, to break the silence. She followed, and for a moment, just a flicker, something softened in her expression. Familiarity, maybe. Memory by association. But then, I reached under the table and brought out a manila folder and a USB stick. I placed both gently between us. Amelia looked down at them, then up at me. What's this? She asked, voice flat. A summary of my estate. I replied, and a clip from your wedding reception. Her eyes didn't blink. I continued, it's the full inheritance report. I thought you might prefer reading it before requesting another meeting with your lawyer. The blood drained from her face so slowly, it was almost elegant. She reached for the folder, but hesitated. This is exactly what you were looking for, I said, though maybe not what you were hoping for. She swallowed hard. You left it out, she asked, quieter now. I did. On purpose. I nodded. I wanted to see who'd find it first. She drew her hand back, straightened her spine. You think I'm stupid? No, I said calmly. I think you're very smart. But you picked the wrong drawer. Her eyes flickered, searching mine for a crack, a misstep. Instead, I added, I have a son who once cried for an hour because he broke a turtle-shaped soap dish. He thought it was magical. That's the boy I raised, the one I still love. Amelia narrowed her eyes. So this is about Evan. This is for Evan, I said. I'm protecting what's left of him. She leaned in slightly, voice sharp. Mama Lane, you're sweet, but you're old. This whole control game you're playing. It's cute, but it's done. Is it? I asked. You're 67 alone and still trying to play puppet master, she continued. But Evan's mine now, and what comes next isn't up to you. I smiled gently, not cruelly. I'm not trying to control anything I said. I just wanted to see what you'd do when you thought no one was watching. She pushed the folder aside, untouched, picked up her purse. You're delusional, she said, and paranoid. I didn't argue. I stood slowly and walked to the sink, began rinsing the cake plate. She waited for me to turn to fight to throw words like daggers. Instead, I said, you can believe whatever helps you sleep at night. Amelia scoffed. You think Evan will believe you? I think I said, turning slightly toward her, that truth has a way of showing up, especially when you invite it in quietly. She moved toward the door. Before she reached it, I added, by the way, the cake recipe, Evan once called it magic too. Said it made everything feel like home. She froze just for a second, but she didn't respond. She opened the door and left without saying goodbye. I stared at the empty chair where she'd sat, the untouched tea, the folder she didn't open, the USB still sitting like a fuse that hadn't been lit. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. I felt hollow, like I'd just cleaned a wound I didn't know I had. The sun was starting to set through the kitchen window, long golden beams stretching across the floor like ribbons. I sat back down, looked at the file, and whispered mostly to myself, you came to dig Amelia, but I buried nothing. You were just in the wrong drawer. He came storming in without knocking. Evan had a key, of course. I'd never asked him to give it back after the wedding. Somehow I thought holding on to it meant something still did. He was flushed. His voice, already tight in the throat, came sharp. Why would you do that to her? I didn't answer right away. I stood at the kitchen counter, slicing the end off a lemon. Slowly, deliberately. She came home crying, he said, stepping closer. All night. You cornered her. You humiliated her. Still, I said nothing. The knife moved through pulp and rind. Thin, perfect rounds. No jagged edges. Mom, he said louder. Now did you hear me? I set the knife down, wiped my hands on a towel, turned to face him. I heard you. His jaw clenched. You planted things. You set traps. You're spying on us. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I asked, would you like some tea? What, he snapped. I boiled water this morning, I said softly, but no one ever poured it. He stared at me, not understanding. I walked over to the kettle, lifted it slowly, tilted it above a cup. Not a sound. Cold. I placed it back on the stove without a word. He rubbed his temples. Amelia said you're trying to turn me against her, that you don't want us to have a future, that you never wanted anyone to take your place. I picked up the lemon slices, placed them neatly in a dish, each one glistening. I only ever wanted someone to love you, I said. He shook his head. You don't get to say that. Not after what you did. I looked up. Evan, I said gently, do you know what yesterday was? He blinked. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. No, I don't. My birthday. The silence after that was not heavy. It was hollow, like the air had stepped back unsure of what to do. His face went red. He didn't speak. I didn't ask for an apology. I didn't expect one. I spent the day alone. I continued, baked a cake no one touched, sat with a cup of tea that never got poured. I watched the light change on the wall and thought about how loud it is when the phone doesn't ring. He sat down at the table, or rather, he dropped into the chair, like he couldn't trust his legs anymore. I'm sorry, he said. It came out small, childlike. I nodded, but didn't comfort him. He looked at the lemon slices. You made my favorite cake. I did. He rubbed his eyes. I don't understand what's happening anymore. I moved to the cupboard, took out a new tea bag, placed it in the empty cup, poured fresh water from the kettle after reboiling it, watched the color rise. Then I spoke. You said she cried all night. He nodded. Yes. I sat down across from him. But did she ask if I cried? His brow furrowed. What she said, I humiliated her. She told you I was cruel. Did she ask if I sat alone with my own memories? Did she wonder if I've been grieving things I don't even have names for anymore? He swallowed hard. I don't want to lose you, Mom. I know. But you're making this harder than it has to be. I reached for the tea, breathed in the steam, let it warm my face. Then I said it. Quiet. Not angry. Just resolved. Kon noi mi lam Amelia chuch kajem. Nung kong I hoi me jang chuch mai nam. He said nothing. I didn't need him to. We sat in silence for a long while. The only sound was the soft clink of a spoon stirring tea, a rhythm I knew by heart. The last time I saw Mary Caldwell, she wore a wide-brimmed hat and bright red lipstick. We were both 40, then seated under her magnolia tree sipping Chardonnay like time had no end. Now she sat in a recliner by a window that barely opened in room 304 of St. Ilara's long-term living. No hat, no lipstick, just white hair combed neatly and eyes that saw everything. Harriet Lane. She said, her voice like silk pulled across stone. I was wondering when you'd come. I hadn't known I would until I did. Something about turning the corner in that quiet corridor and seeing her name on the room placard made my chest tighten. I knocked anyway. Is it all right if I sit? I asked. Mary gestured to the armchair beside her. Of course, though I can't promise much entertainment. They ration the cable channels here. I smiled faintly. It's not the cable I came for. We talked. About the past. About Jonathan. About Evan. I told her a watered-down version, just enough to let her sense the weight I carried. Then she spoke. You know, I had a fortune once, she said, eyes fixed out the window. Richard left me everything. 4 homes, stocks, a vineyard in Sonoma. I remembered. Richard Caldwell had been a banking legend. Mary, his elegant shadow. I gave it all to Emily, she continued. My only daughter. I thought if I gave her everything, she'd feel safe enough to love me without condition. Her voice didn't break. That's what made it worse. What happened, I asked, though I already knew. She sold the vineyard within a month, liquidated the stocks, put the summer house in her husband's name, said I should try living simply now that I was older. I said nothing. Just reached for the cup of warm ginger tea on her tray and handed it to her. She said it with a smile Mary added, as if I'd asked for a sermon, not a seat at the table. She took a sip, then continued. 6 months later, I slipped on the kitchen tile, broke my hip. She said she couldn't take me in, not with the twins needing space, so she found me a place. Her eyes scanned the sterile walls. This place. I swallowed. She comes, I asked gently. Mary shook her head. Once, that first week, brought me an iPad and said I could FaceTime any time. Then nothing. She leaned back, closed her eyes. You know what I think about sometimes, she said. I think about the daffodils she planted as a child. She used to name them, used to believe they were all watching her. She opened her eyes again. I gave her the garden. She gave me this room. I felt my throat tighten. Mary, I'm so sorry. She looked at me, really looked. Don't be. Just remember, sometimes giving them everything makes them forget where it came from. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Then she added, barely above a whisper, I thought legacy meant love. But maybe money just makes love show its teeth. I looked out the same narrow window. Nurses passed in the hallway beyond. Wheels squeaked. An overhead page called for assistance in another room. Then Mary turned her head slightly. You haven't told him, have you? I met her gaze. No, I said. I haven't. She nodded once slowly. Good. Because once they know, they stop seeing you. A lump sat hard in my chest. I remembered Evan at 7 crying over a broken turtle soap dish. I remembered the boy who once left wildflowers on my pillow with a note that said, for the queen of our castle. But I also remembered the man who'd stormed into my kitchen and defended a woman who'd never asked if I was okay. I reached into my bag and pulled out a lemon cookie I'd wrapped earlier that day, placed it on Mary's tray. She smiled. You always did bring the good ones. I stood to leave. She looked up and said, Keep the secret, Harriet. Not forever, just long enough for them to show you who they really are. The call came at 2:17 a.m. I'd been drifting half asleep, half sinking into the familiar ache that comes when the house is too still. The screen of the phone glowed on the nightstand. I reached for it with fingers that had long stopped trembling at late-night news. Mrs. Lane, the voice said. This is Lorraine from Ridgeview Trust. I'm sorry to disturb you, but our fraud detection system just flagged an attempted withdrawal from your account, ending in 3421. I sat up. Was it approved? I asked, voice low, steady. No, ma'am. The system blocked it automatically due to a mismatch in security protocols. But I wanted to inform you directly, the attempt was to transfer the full balance, $250,000. IP address, I asked. There was a pause. It traces to a residential line linked to an account under Evan Lane. I believe that's your yes, I said. Thank you for letting me know. She hesitated. Would you like us to press charges? No, I replied. Not yet. After hanging up, I didn't return to bed. Instead, I walked downstairs and turned on the living room lamp, the same one Jonathan used to read under. Its light was soft, dim, the kind that makes memories glow brighter than furniture. I sat on the couch and placed the leather-bound photo album on the coffee table. It was worn at the edges. The spine cracked in 2 spots. Evan had once spilled orange juice on it when he was 7. The page corners still curled from it. I opened to the first photo. Him in a blue romper clutching a stuffed giraffe. A grin, missing 2 front teeth. the next his first day of kindergarten, hair sticking out on one side. He'd insisted on dressing himself that morning. A Halloween picture, he as a firefighter, me in my apron kneeling beside him on the porch steps. Page by page, the timeline unfolded. Evan learning to ride a bike. Evan crying over a bruised knee. Evan holding up a Happy Mother's Day card scrawled in shaky crayon. My finger stopped at a photo of Jonathan holding our son on his shoulders at the zoo. Evan's small hands clutching his father's thinning hair. It hurt, but not in the way it used to. There was no anger left, just a quiet ache for a boy who used to run to me with scraped palms and say, "Fix it, Mama." He was a man now, but some scrapes don't show on skin. And some breakages happen slow, so slow you only feel the fracture long after it's done. I closed the album, left it on the table, and sat there in silence, one hand resting on its cover, the other curled loosely in my lap until morning drew its first line of light across the floor. That morning, the house was still. I brewed a small pot of chamomile. No sugar, just warm water and quiet. Then I took the album off the table and brought it to the dining room. I laid it down, flat-flipped past the pages worn from years of fingertips and stories, and stopped somewhere in the middle, next to a picture of Evan on his 8th birthday chocolate frosting smeared across his chin, his eyes bright with mischief and joy. That's where I slipped the letter in, handwritten, folded twice. No envelope. I'd written it the night before while the silence hummed around me like a low hymn, and I hadn't cried. Not once. Not because I wasn't grieving, but because grief in its oldest form looks like peace. The letter read, "Evan, if you're reading this, you've gone looking not for me, but for something you think will make you safer, richer, more in control. But the only thing I've left in this house that's worth holding on to is in your hands right now. It's not the money. It's you. It's always been you. You were born on a Tuesday. Rain in the morning, sunlight by noon. Your father held my hand in the delivery room, and when they placed you on my chest, he whispered, 'Even if one day he forgets us, at least today, we gave him something beautiful. We didn't know what kind of man you'd grow into. We only knew you deserved to grow, to feel safe, to be loved freely without clause or contract. That's what we tried to give you. Not wealth, not guarantees, just a home you wouldn't question.' Somewhere along the way, life blurred the lines between protection and possession. I don't blame you for being afraid. The world teaches us early to measure people by what they leave behind. But my son, if you walk through this house thinking only about what you can take, you'll miss what was always yours without needing to ask. This album, these pages, the woman who fed you soup when you had the flu and watched you sleep on Christmas Eve, these are your inheritance. And if that's not enough, then the rest never would have been. I don't hold anything now except memories. But you may be walking away from the one worth the most. Love, Mom. I closed the album, ran my hand over the cover. There was no guarantee he'd find it, no certainty he'd read it with the heart I'd written from. But that was never the point. Some things aren't meant to change others, just to remind them when the noise fades who they used to be. The doorbell rang at 10:00 a.m., sharp, just as I was folding laundry in the sunroom. George never called ahead. He knew I didn't like anticipation. He walked in without a word, placed a manila folder on the table, and poured himself a cup of tea. No sugar, just like me. We'd done this dance for years. "You ready to see how deep the rabbit hole goes?" he asked. I didn't answer, just nodded. He slid the folder toward me. inside screen captures from my bank's alert logs, a digital footprint traced to the Amelia iPad, the flagged IP address. Next, a transcript from the video George had acquired. Amelia's voice clear and confident. "If everything goes well, I'll have the keys to the treasure within a year." Then copies of the contract she'd handed me, the asset alignment agreement, wrapped in legalese and entitlement. And last, a draft letter addressed to Amelia's legal representative, requesting a private arbitration. Attached to it was a contingency press release, just in case. George leaned back. "I've seen enough to move forward," he said. "You won't need to say much. I'll do the talking." I stared at the folder. It didn't feel like power. It felt like paperwork soaked in grief. "George," I said quietly, "I don't want this to become a war." He raised his eyebrows. "If you don't protect yourself, Harriet, then it becomes a burial. And I don't bury clients until they're actually dead." I smiled faintly. He'd always had a dramatic flair, but I knew what he meant. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about the line I'd never wanted to cross, being forced into it, not for justice, but for clarity. I looked out the window. My son's face as a boy flickered in memory. His gap-toothed grin, his hand in mine at the zoo, his small voice asking if Santa would still come after his father died. He wasn't that boy anymore, and I wasn't the woman who used to believe love could fix everything. I closed the folder and placed both hands on top of it. "I'll go," I said. "I'll sit in the room. I'll listen. But not to fight." George tilted his head, then why I met his eyes. "So Evan knows. So he sees his mother walked into that room, not to win, but to show him she's reached the edge." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded once firmly. "This ends on your terms, Harriet." It was the first thing all week that made me feel like I hadn't already lost. They seated us in a sterile conference room. Neutral tones, bottled water lined like soldiers, no windows. Across from me sat Evan and Amelia. A lawyer to Amelia's left, George to mine. Evan wouldn't look at me, just kept his eyes on the center of the table like it held something he was afraid to touch. I could hear Amelia's foot tapping beneath the table. "I won't be long," I said quietly. George nodded and placed a small speaker on the table. I pushed play. The room filled with Amelia's voice, clear, almost cheerful. "If everything goes smoothly, I'll have the keys to the treasure within a year." Then her laugh, a cruel little curl of sound. Silence followed. I looked at no one, just folded my hands in my lap. "I'm not here to press charges," I said. "I'm not here to shame anyone. I only wanted it heard." Amelia scoffed. "So you ambushed us with a recording, a cheap trap. That's not just pathetic, it's illegal." George smiled, calm as a lake in November. "In this state, ma'am, it's legal if one party consents. That party was your friend, the one you didn't realize had a conscience." Evan shifted. His hands clenched, then unclenched. Still, he didn't look up. I stood slowly. My knees ached, but I didn't show it. "This isn't about money anymore," I said. "This is about something far older, something I thought would never break." I let that hang. Then softly, "Trust." I reached for my coat. "Wait," Evan said. His voice was rough, not angry, just raw. I turned to him. His face was pale. Finally, his eyes met mine. "Me. Did you really think I was like her?" he asked. Not accusing, not defensive, just a boy suddenly unsure of who he'd become. I didn't answer right away. I stepped closer, not too close. Looked into him like I was looking through old glass, fogged but familiar. "No," I whispered, "but I feared you wouldn't know the difference." until it was too late. He didn't cry. Neither did I. That wasn't the kind of grief this was. It was the kind that leaves a quiet crack in the middle of the table, one no amount of money could ever seal. Before I left the room, I paused, not for effect, for memory. There was one more truth, one more thread I had held in my hand for decades, never tying it, never cutting it, just carrying it quietly. "Evan," I said, not turning around, "do you remember when you were 6, I could feel the shift in the air? The way only memory can hush a room. You had a heart condition, a rare one. We flew to Switzerland for surgery." He nodded slowly, eyes narrowing. "I sold everything I had in my name to pay for it," I continued. "Every stock, every account, every deed tied to me." Amelia opened her mouth. George glanced at her sharply, and she stayed quiet. "What I didn't know," I said, my voice steady, "was that your father had already anticipated what I'd do. He bought back everything quietly, anonymously, so that years later, those assets would still be in my name." Evan's eyes widened. I saw the flash of something shock, then shame. "I never told you," I said gently, "because I didn't want you growing up thinking you owed your life to me." I finally turned around. "I just wanted you to live it." His lips parted. Nothing came out. There it was. The silence that says more than any scream. That's what I had saved, not the money, not the name, but that one unspoken truth. Because sometimes the deepest love is the one that doesn't ask to be seen. It simply chooses to stay. I placed the final signature on the folder. It was the document that officially detached all joint claims assets and authority from my estate, real or imagined. George would handle everything moving forward. I had nothing more to explain. No ceremony, no drama. Just the quiet click of a pen on paper and the weight of something invisible lifting off my spine. I rose slowly. My knees didn't fight me this time. Evan looked at me like he was still catching up to the room he'd just entered. Amelia avoided my gaze altogether. Her hands were folded too tightly in her lap. I wondered for a moment if she knew it was already over, not the inheritance, but the illusion of control. Mrs. Lane George said softly, "I'll walk you out." I nodded, but just as we stepped toward the door, I heard it. Me. "Wait." Evan's voice, torn between urgency and confusion. That mix only a child can wear when they suddenly see the parent not as permanent, but as someone who can walk away. I paused, turned. He was standing now, shoulders trembling, breath uneven. I didn't mean... I just thought. I offered him a smile. The kind that comes from both love and a long ache. "When you're ready," I said, "to see me with eyes that don't measure worth by wealth, I'll still be there. No accusation, no bitterness, just a statement of possibility." Then I turned again. This time, I didn't look back. Sometimes the only boundary between forgiveness and awakening is a door closed without a lock. And that day, I didn't need a key. Just the silence of walking away. Not to punish, but to return to myself. The sun was soft that morning, not blazing, not hidden, just enough to warm my back as I bent down near the lavender. I always liked this part of the garden. Jonathan used to call it my quiet cathedral. He said I looked holier here than I ever did in church. The hose hummed gently in my hand, soaking the roots of each violet stem. The scent, clean, calming, reminded me that even broken earth can bloom again, given waterlight and time. Then came the sound I hadn't expected. The phone rang. I wiped my hands on my apron, not in a rush. I thought it might be George checking in. But the screen read, "Evan." I hesitated, just for a second. Then I answered. His voice was lower than usual, stripped of its usual rhythm. Mom. A pause. Amelia's gone. She left this morning. I didn't speak. Let the air carry him. I watched everything again. The video, the reports, your letter. Another pause. This time, longer. I'm sorry I didn't see it. Sorry I made you feel like a stranger in your own life. I looked down at the soil between the lavender rows. A bee hovered, gently choosing. You called because you want forgiveness, I said calmly. Or because you want me in your life again. The silence stretched. Then came his reply, cracked but clear. I just want my mother. A breeze passed through the hedges. I tilted my head to the sky. The clouds drifted like they had nowhere urgent to be. And then I smiled. Well, I said softly, then come home. There's tea on the table. And I think the lemon shortbread still turned out all right. He didn't answer. But I heard the breath catch, that kind of breath a boy makes when he's almost found his way back. I turned off the hose. The lavender glistened in the sunlight like they too were waiting. They say money changes people. But I've come to believe it doesn't. It only reveals. It shows you who sees you and who only sees your worth in numbers. And sometimes the hardest love is the one where you wait quietly, not to punish, but to leave the door gently unlocked. So now I'll ask you, have you ever stayed silent to protect something or someone you love? Was it worth it? Did it hurt? Would you do it again? Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.